everyone, welcome back. I am your host, Dr. Sarah Eileen-Downey Akers, and you're watching the first official episode of The Happiness Standard. Now, I hope that our episode title has intrigued you in some capacity, Permission to Disappoint, because today we are going to be talking about the rules that you live by and questioning where they've come from. And not the policies and the laws and the deadlines and things like that, but the invisible ones, the ones that shape our life, the ones that form our habits, and determine how you show up for yourself and for others in your life. It's going to be a great episode. Can't wait for you guys to listen. All right, welcome back. Quick shout out to our music man, Matt. Thank you so much for the genius that you are in coming up with the sound of the Happiness Standard. I love the groove. I love the funk. He did the intro and the outro and really helped bring the podcast to life in terms of what it sounded like. So, Matt, thank you so much. You're the best. All right, so we're going to dive right on into our first full segment of the standard. And so this week, as you can probably tell by the name, Permission to Disappoint, is that we are going to be talking about how happiness can still show up and coincide when you know that others are disappointed in you in some capacity. Have you ever taken the time to really sit down and ask yourself, where do my standards come from? Did I choose them or did I inherit them? Did they come from your parents, your church, your friend group, social media, maybe the culture that you grew up in, right? Either your familial culture and what it was like in your little nucleus or external. But when I sat down and asked myself this honestly, that question really changed a lot for me because I found out that I was living and following certain standards without ever consciously deciding that they were my own. And that's a very dangerous place to be, is to be on autopilot. And I found out and learned really that we actually have a lot more control than people think that we do in our lives. Because if you don't consciously choose your standards, you will unconsciously absorb someone else's. And that's something that we want to stay away from. And because then when you do that, you might wake up one day and you're just not fulfilled. You might always feel like you're chasing something, someone else's approval, someone else's expectation of you. And it's never just enough, right? And so when I found out and kind of discovered this about myself, that I'm the one that gets to decide when my effort is enough and when I've done a good enough job or when I was a good enough friend or when I have expended all of my mental and emotional resources, that was enough. Because now, instead of having that be on someone else and relying on external validation, I know now internally. And this was one of the biggest boundaries that I really learned, is understanding that being disciplined is really about setting boundaries. And the thing about boundaries is that I'm more likely to follow them when I set them myself. And so when I start to say things like, well, I don't eat that, or I don't go there, or I don't hang out with these people, I'm more convicted because I know that it's my own standard that I'm trying to set versus maybe a doctor telling you, or a friend telling you, or a parent telling you something. And now when someone else imposes it, it's not that I want to resist it, but I feel like I have more leeway almost versus when I set something and do it out for myself, when I don't do it, the only person I'm disappointing is myself. And that can also be really heavy. And so for me, that discipline and that boundary setting is not about restriction, and it's not about punishment, and it's not about trying to be more rigid, but it's about alignment. It's making sure that the bridge between who I say I am versus how I actually live are connecting and making sure that those things are aligned. So that discipline is about keeping promises to yourself. Because when I break those promises to myself, no matter how small they might be, there's something that just feels off, right? I'm a little bit disappointed in myself But honestly, I don't always let myself feel that disappointment in maybe ways that I should. Because sometimes I'll do something for someone knowing that they want me to do it, right? And I'm just kind of, you know, just whatever about it. But I know that it makes them happy. And of course, there are things that we do for the people we love that maybe we wouldn't choose to do. I'm not saying to not do those things. But what I am saying is that when I keep those promises to myself, it makes it a little bit easier to sit with the disappointment of others, knowing I stayed true to myself. And so I become more confident and more clear when I know that I am following my own boundaries, right? When I'm in my own lane, when I have set my own expectations for myself. And it was very empowering to say, you know what? I am enough. Whatever effort I put in, that was enough. However I showed up that day, that was enough. And to give yourself grace along those lines as well, because I got to decide that versus having it be external. And so I got to determine the type of person I was becoming and what I was willing to accept and what I was willing to not accept. And so that's not necessarily ego, right? But it's ownership over your actions and ownership over the way that you treat others and the way that you talk to yourself. But what's hard is that society isn't always very accepting of us following our own standards that might not line up with the norm of society. I can remember when my husband and I first started dating, he had run a marathon that year. And I have never run a marathon, nor do I intend to, but I had questions for him. I wanted to know what the training was like. What was that experience? And he had so much good insight for me. But one of the things that stood out the most is that he said, when you are just trying to stay in your own lane, trying to do what's best for you, you have your own goals, that it you become the bad guy in other people's story a lot of the time because you say no to going out later or staying out later. And you say no to that slice of cake at the birthday party or no to the extra drink. And people don't really understand maybe why or where that's coming from. And having to say no, it makes people uncomfortable. And even though you're just trying to do the best thing for yourself, and even though it doesn't really matter if you eat that other cake or not, right? That slice of cake, it doesn't impact or impose on someone else. But sure enough, they have an opinion about it. And that's the thing, is that what nobody really talks about when staying true to your own standard is that that discipline to yourself will often cost you the comfort of others. And I think that it's really important to understand how to navigate that and how to have a better understanding of what it means to disappoint others by not abandoning yourself and why that's important. Because when you start saying things like, I don't drink that, or I don't gossip, or I don't talk about my spouse that way, or I don't participate in that, when you start saying no, people notice, right? But that is the best version of you. The best version of you is the one that has parameters. The one that goes, I don't drink that, I don't talk to these people, I don't engage in those activities. The one that knows the path that they're headed on, right? The one that doesn't just haphazardly accept things, right? You're allowed to be intentional with what you accept and expect from others. But people notice when you start to say no. And sometimes people will feel judged. In fact, most of the time, they probably do. And even if you didn't judge them, right? That's not where you're coming from. You're not coming from a place of superiority. You're coming from a place of self restriction in a way that is self discipline. That's also a form of self love, right? Like those are all kind of connected. But that's when it gets hard because sometimes other people will feel uncomfortable because your boundary highlights their lack of one. And it's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, right? But you just have different boundaries for yourself. And people aren't always very accepting of things that are different from them. But that's where it gets hard because now you're sitting in someone else's disappointment. And I had to learn what does that look like instead of just caving in, right? Because it would be easier to go with the flow. It would be easier to laugh at the joke, to skip the boundary, to bend to the standard, right? Whatever it would be. But that's when I realized is that it's okay to disappoint others as long as you haven't abandoned and disappointed yourself in the process. And now that, of course, is under the assumption that you have healthy and high standards for yourself, right? Which is why I'm asking the question, where do these standards come from, right? This expectation of who you're quote unquote supposed to be, right? Because who really has a say over that? And so let me just be clear though. This isn't about thinking that your boundaries are better than someone else's. It's about making sure that your boundaries and discipline and decisions are actually yours, right? The expectations that you meet on a day to day basis are yours and yours alone. Because sometimes, and a lot of the time, people are just repeating what they saw growing up, right? They're living by what their friends have normalized. They're reacting instead of choosing. And autopilot is a very comfortable place to be, but it's not a very active place to be. And in life, I mean, who wants to stand idly, right? I think deep down everyone wants to engage in some capacity and however they know best. And so asking yourself, is it autopilot or am I choosing this? I can remember asking myself this across different relationships, different friendships, romantic, platonic, familial, all of it, right? Where it's like, do I choose this? Like really? Do I want this? Is this the life that I'm going to choose for myself? Because at any time, we have the power to say, "You know what? Nope. I don't accept this anymore." Right? And that has to do with who we are and understanding what we'll accept. And so, while autopilot feels easy, it doesn't always feel aligned. And sometimes when we're trying to meet other people's standards, we're always chasing. It's like running on a treadmill, right? It's a great place to go if you're not trying to go anywhere. And so when you miss that alignment, right, it can be very easy to allow people's expectation of you to feel like the biggest thing and the biggest weight on your shoulders because now you're letting somebody else tell you if it's enough or not. Instead of you saying, you know what? No, today I showed up, I did my best, and that's enough for me. Not enough for your boss or for your best friend or for your significant other, right? And now that's not to say that you dismiss those expectations that they have of you too, right? It's kind of this dance. But ultimately, I hope that you understand where all of those standards are coming from and why you hold on to them. So for me, personally, when I know that if I've acted in a way that has disappointed someone else, what anchors me is knowing that I make good with it with God, personally, right? Faith is my anchor. My relationship with God is my anchor. So if I know that other people are disappointed, but I can sit and I can pray and I can talk to God honestly and say, I did my best, I'm okay with that. And whatever that means, right? And so it reminds me that life is not about the external applause. Well, it's nice, right? It's not about universal approval. For me, it's about integrity. And it's about that I live in a way that I believe that my God would approve of and would be accepting of. And at the end of the day, would he tell me, well done, my good and faithful servant? Because honestly, I cannot stand the idea of potentially talking to him one day face to face and him being disappointed. Like it really is quite it's scary and it's heavy and I will always make the decision to disappoint others if it means gaining God's approval, right? Because it's not about the earthly things that the world will tell us is important. But it's about being able to say, I I did what I believed was right with the information I had at the time. And I'm so grateful that that alignment is between me and him and not me and the masses or me and anyone else because it removes a weight that I don't have to carry. And now that anchor might look different for you if you don't have a religious background or if it's a different religion. But I really encourage you to ask yourself, what is the anchor for you? What guides those decisions in you engaging in behavior that you are accepting of if other people might not be? What is your standard? And then that's the hard question, right? Is my own approval enough for me? Is it enough that I say, you know what, the work that I put in, I'm good with it for today? Because a lot of people, I feel like it's not, right? Because they hold themselves to this almost impossible or impossible standard. And it's really important to be able to give yourself grace in that capacity too, right? So, like I said before, it's this dance, it's this back and forth of other people's expectation and your expectation and how you hold yourself to those things. But ultimately, it's about your own approval of your own behavior with your own relationship with God. Because there's going to be decisions that you make alone. There'll be paths that you walk alone. There'll be consequences that you live alone too. And you have to be good with it. And all of those moments, no matter who says what, you have to be able to say, I am good with my decision. And honestly, be convicted about it. Be honest about it. Because when you're alone and you're in those moments, your affirmations to yourself, they need to be enough. They need to be enough. Your voice has to be louder than the crowd's, right? With, of course, God's voice being the loudest. And so it needs to be about your approval and not someone else's, right? Because then it's about integrity. And then you start to ask yourself things like, well, whose approval are you seeking based on who you're willing to disappoint? I mean, really, if you sit with that, right? And then of course, people have expectations of you and you try to meet them. But at the end of the day, are you proud of the reasons that someone might be disappointed in you, right? Are you proud of the way that you conduct yourself in the world? Are you proud of the way that you treat people? And for the longest time, right, because we kind of accept things as like quote unquote societal standards, right? So one that comes to mind for me is it's this idea that, well, we lash out at the people we're closest to, right? It's kind of just something that's expected. It's an excuse that we get. And honestly, frankly, I just completely reject that idea. I don't think that it's a good thing to live by because I think that it gives us an excuse when I believe that the people around us should get the best version of us. And that's not to say that we won't have bad days and we'll need grace as they will too. But really, I mean, if someone is upset by you choosing yourself, are you okay with that? Right? Are you okay with a friend being disappointed in you because you didn't attend the hangout session because you needed to go to the gym? Because maybe your alarm didn't go off in the morning, right? And now you have to make adjustments. Sitting with that disappointment from others can feel very heavy, but I feel like we also make it heavy ourselves, right? Where at the end of the day, we can just like water off a duck's back, my dad used to say, right? We don't have to let it bother us. When we know that we showed up and we did our best, we can rest assured knowing that it's all going to be okay. And that however you showed up that day is acceptable. And while you might not give it 100%, maybe you show up and you're at 60%, or you're at 30%, or you're at 75, or you're at 85. Whatever that is, right? Give 100% of that. And I would imagine, and I would hope, that part of you would also be able to say, you know what, because I did that, that's enough. That is all that I had to give that day. And that's okay, right? We don't have to show up 100% every single day, right? That's not what progress and improvement looks like. But when you choose discipline over comfort, and when you hold a boundary, or when you don't hold a boundary, right? Now you're experiencing disappointment in yourself. And I guess basically what I'm trying to say is that it's okay. I'm learning that it's okay to disappoint others as long as you haven't abandoned yourself in the process. Because at the end of the day, you're the one in your own head, right? And you need to have those positive thoughts to help get you back on track. And so how does happiness play into this, right? So when somebody is disappointed in you, how can you still experience happiness, especially if that person is important to you? Because of course it's going to weigh on you because you're human and you want to please others, right? You might be a people pleaser from one fellow one to another, right? Um but I'm trying to get better at that because I know I want to live the way that I see fit. And of course, that comes from different standards. That comes from things like me, it comes from things from the Bible. It comes from things that my parents instilled in me. It comes from expectations of in my relationship with my best friend, with my husband, with whoever it might be. I take all of that into consideration. And then I ask myself, I say, okay, now I have to act accordingly based off of my priorities, right? And so happiness for me then switched, and it wasn't about happiness is no longer pleasing everyone, which is like, it's like sounds crazy, like to say out loud and to accept that and to think that that's okay and that there's nothing wrong with that. Because of course you're trying to please everyone, but ultimately you want to live in a way where you're proud of yourself, right? And that's the thing, that's the caveat. Happiness then becomes the way that I live with the boundaries that I set in place, with the behavior that I accept and the behavior that I don't accept. And so, knowing that I didn't compromise my values, that I didn't betray my own standard, that is where happiness comes from. It doesn't come from meeting somebody else's expectation. While that's nice, right? It's like bonus, right? But that should always be a bonus. You shouldn't be chasing somebody else's expectation of you. You should be meeting your own. And so, and that's not to say I am not perfect. Far from it, though I try. I'm sure as we all do. And that's not to say that I don't struggle. And really this is a new concept for me where it's like, okay, I can live and understand and feel someone else's disappointment in me, knowing that I still did right by myself. Right? And so overall, you can say that you respect the way that you move throughout the world. And there's a lot to be said for that because then happiness is then something that's stable that comes from the inside, right? Because it's consistent versus wanting that external approval or applause from somebody else. Because when we're always chasing or trying to meet somebody's expectation, you're just left exhausted every time. Like you're just trying it to be enough. You want it to be enough. You want somebody else needs more. And you're just trying. But what about you? Like, how about just to be able to say, you know what? It's enough because I said so. Period. End of story. Right? How many times have you really done that in your life? Um, because ultimately this happiness, it's not built on approval from others, right? It's built on the alignment that you have created within yourself. And so that's what discipline can give you. It's not about control or superiority, right? It's about giving yourself stability. And when you can give yourself stability based off of your own actions, right, you can experience a form of happiness because then you've known that you stayed true to you. And ultimately, the people that love you and that care about you and that want the best for you will hopefully trust that you also know what's best for yourself, right? That's not to say that there aren't outliers where, help needs to come in and things of that nature. But for the most part, I mean, are you able to really sit down and say, you know what, I hold myself to these standards? Like one for me, a personal one, is we've kind of just accepted that the world is not fair. And it's not, right? And that's okay. However, I I can be. The world is not fair, but I can be. And that is a standard that I hold myself to and something that I'm proud of in the way that I try to conduct myself with people, with relationships, with topics, with taboo things or whatever might be at hand. And so when you learn how to be able to sit with other people's disappointment, well, of course, that's not the goal. You can still walk away and feel good about it because you know that you are true to yourself. And so that comes from self discovery too. And so there's a lot of different avenues that happiness and disappointment and what that it ebbs and flows and what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. But ultimately, I hope that you can learn and be okay with discovering that self-love and that discipline to yourself will cost you the comfort of other people. But that is okay because we are not here to have to make other people feel comfortable. Of course, we want to, we strive to, and you want to be kind and courteous in everything that you do and respectful as well. But ultimately, how do you feel about your actions and your expectations that you have set for yourself? But this raises another question. So, if you are secure enough to disappoint others, what happens when someone disappoints you or when you're on the receiving end of that, right? What happens when something doesn't meet your standards? So, we covered a lot, but next week on the segment of the standard, we will be talking about permission to be disappointed and how happiness can show up there too. I think it's great, but I hope you guys have some food for thought for this week and drop in the comments any of your thoughts. I can't wait to see. Okay, so now our first rotating segment. I was so excited to see this email because it's my favorite. And so we have a segment of unfiltered wins. So here is an email from Emily from Florida. She says, "Hi, Dr. Downey. Okay, I've gone back and forth about sending this because I wanted to submit an unfiltered win, but it felt so small. And then I realized that is literally the point of the segment. So here we are. My win is I stopped responding to emails after 7 p.m. this week. Like, fully stopped. Hard boundary, laptop closed, notifications off, done," she says. I know that might sound basic, but for me, this felt like a full-blown personality change. I am historically the person who responds to emails at 9:47 p.m. just to, quote, stay on top of things, which actually means I stay in a constant low-level state of work mode panic forever. Relatable. But my inbox has basically been a 24/7 open tab in my brain. So on Monday, I made a rule. After 7 p.m., no more emails. None. Not, oh, I'll just check really quick, or not, I'll respond if it's not too much. Nope. Completely closed. Good job, Emily. She continues. And sure enough, that very night at 7:12 p.m., an email came in that normally would have had me typing back immediately with a cheerful, happy to help, with internally spiraling. I saw it, I felt the urge, I hovered around the email, and then I did not respond. And here's the shocking twist. Nothing exploded, nobody panicked, no one sent a follow-up with urgency and sirens. The world kept spinning. I answered the next morning at a completely reasonable hour, and everything was fine. Actually, it was more than fine. I felt calm. I ate dinner without that buzzing, "Are you going to be checking your email?" feeling. I watched TV and was present in my own life. Revolutionary. It felt weirdly thrilling, like I had staged a tiny, very polite rebellion. I kept thinking, wait, am I allowed to just have an evening? Apparently, the answer is yes. So my unfiltered win is that I protected my 7 p.m. boundary and survived. And not only survived, but felt lighter, more human, and honestly, kind of powerful. Turns out my value does not increase based on how fast I reply at night. Anyway, this felt small, which is why I almost didn't send it in. But if this segment is about the real life wins that shift how we feel day to day, then this is mine. Thanks for creating a space where these moments count. You can absolutely use my name or keep me anonymous. Either way, I'm cheering for this show. Thank you so much, Emily. All right. Well, thank you for writing in, Emily. So for one, I'm so proud of you. This feeling is so relatable, and I can remember being in school and I would get emails from professors or from other peers, and it would be like sometimes it'd be like 10, 11 p.m. And honestly, I would answer them because I felt like I had to, right? And so having that was something that when I graduated, I like joked about like with people that I was graduating with. I was like, "Oh my gosh, now we can like actually close our computer and like not have to worry about any of the notifications." Like it's crazy because it's because we have technology on us just all the time, it makes it um it's we just feel like we're always on, right? Like we're always kind of on work mode because we still get the emails, We get the notifications, we get the calls, right? And so I am so proud that you said no. And the best part about that is that nothing bad happened and that you were able to kind of show yourself that this is allowed, right? It's about giving yourself permission and allowing you to have that boundary, right? Which kind of fits in with our first segment that we talked about, having those boundaries for ourselves. Most importantly, I love that you said, it turns out my value does not increase based on how fast I reply at night. I think this is a very powerful concept because have you asked yourself, where do you get your value from as a human being, right? Because if it's tied up in something external and that thing gets taken away from you, then you're kind of left just pondering and probably upset and confused. Versus if it comes internally, like for myself, knowing that my value is from being a child of God, not because of anything else, right? Not because of what I bring to the table or because of my degrees or because of what I do for work, while those things help, right? My value comes from somewhere else. And so, how do you know where you get your value from, right? Just because innately as a person you have some, right? You contribute to our society. And this is awesome. And I love that it was something that was small too, because wins are anything that we allow them to be, right? They don't have to be the big, crazy, fun experiences, right? They can be something small, something calming, something grounding. So Emily, I really hope that you can continue to do this and that it's a habit that you build, knowing that it's okay that you are allowed to have your own night and be quote unquote off the clock, right? It's something that we all deserve. So, Emily, congratulations on your unfiltered win, and thank you so much for writing in. Okay, so that brings us to our final segment of the week, Glimmer. So, something that brought me joy outside of myself this last week is my husband and my mom and I, we went to Disneyland last week. And it was so much fun. But one of the things is that we had gone on Space Mountain, and on the way out, you can see the picture that they take of you on the ride. And we were waiting for our picture to turn up, and I saw this family, and it was a young girl, probably in her late teens, and I think that they were from Australia because they had accents, which was awesome. But when you're standing right there and you can see the pictures, I saw she came and she rushed up and she found their picture, and she looks at it and she starts laughing. Oh my gosh, she thought it was the most hilarious thing ever. So then she calls over her I presume is her brother, and then he comes over and he sees the picture and then he has this big reaction. So it's this like chain of events, right? And so I see her, I see the brother, and then sure enough, mom and dad and a couple other people come, and they all come and all at the same time. They all look at their picture, and they just start laughing so hard in this space, right? And like they have no concern or worry about people around them, as they should, because they're on their vacation, right? But it was so awesome to see this succession of family, like in real time, come in, see their picture, someone else come in, see it, have their reaction, and it just kept going. And it brought me so much joy. Like it was so cool to just be there because it's an experience that a lot of people don't always get. And so being able to see how they felt being caught on camera, like in the ride, it was so fun. And I remember at that point, like I was kind of just distracted. Unfortunately, we did miss our picture, so we didn't get to see it. But that moment that I saw with that family totally made up for it. Because in that moment, they were just happy and they were together and nothing else mattered. Nothing else except for that picture that now they get to keep forever. And it was just so fun. It was kind of like a cartoon when like you see everyone and then something happens. And I walked away from that, and I remember I told my husband, I said, "That was just a glimmer." And he just smiled at me because he knew what I was talking about. And so glimmers can be everywhere. You just have to look for them sometimes. So with that, that concludes our very first full episode of The Happiness Standard. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Your time is valuable. I so appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that something from this episode gave you some food for thought, something to think about, something to resonate on, something to meditate on sometime this week. But most importantly, I hope that you don't forget to make happiness your standard and not just your goal so that you're not chasing it. I'll see you guys next week on episode number 2 Permission to be disappointed. It's going to be great. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.